The alarm screamed through Commander Jake Morrison's helmet, and he knew immediately that something had gone terribly wrong. He was outside the research vessel Concordant Discovery, his magnetic boots locked to the hull, tools floating in the zero gravity around him. The repair job on the external sensor array was almost complete when the ship's entire outer structure began to vibrate. Morrison's headset crackled to life. The voice of Captain Thesic, the Velkari commander, came through in that clicking, precise way the insectoid species always spoke. Commander Morrison returned to airlock immediately. "We have critical situation." Jake grabbed his tools and started moving along the hull toward the airlock, but the vibration was getting worse. Through his helmet, he could see flashes of blue light erupting from the ship's reactor section. That was bad. That was very bad. "Captain, what's happening?" Morrison asked, his heart rate climbing. "Cascade failure in primary reactor. Radiation levels rising fast. We must make emergency jump in 90 seconds or ship will explode." Morrison was still 50 meters from the airlock. He pushed off and used his maneuvering jets to speed toward the entrance. 40 meters. 30 meters. The blue flashes were getting brighter, more frequent. "Captain, I'm almost there." 20 meters out. There was a pause. Then Thesic's voice came back, and something in the tone made Morrison's blood run cold. "Commander Morrison, the radiation is already at lethal levels for human physiology. The airlock is contaminated. If you enter ship, you will die within minutes. If we wait for decontamination procedures, we all die." Morrison stopped moving. He floated there in the darkness of space, staring at the airlock door just 15 meters away. "What are you saying, Captain?" "I am saying that mathematics are clear. 1 life versus 43 lives. The choice is simple. I'm sorry, Commander. Your species has always been brave. Die well." The airlock door, which had been cycling open, suddenly reversed. Morrison watched in disbelief as it sealed shut. He hit his jets and rushed forward, slamming his gloved hands against the metal surface. "Wait, Captain, wait. There has to be another way." But the ship was already powering up its faster-than-light drive. Morrison could feel it through the hull, a deep thrumming that ran through his entire body. He pushed away from the surface just as the Concordant Discovery folded space around itself and vanished, leaving him alone in the black void. For several long seconds, Morrison just floated there, his breathing loud in his helmet. He was tethered to the remains of the sensor array, nothing but a small platform of metal and wires in the middle of nowhere. His suit's computer helpfully displayed the facts. Oxygen remaining 47 hours, 32 minutes. Water, 8 hours. Power, 72 hours. Nearest human settlement, 412 light-years away. Morrison had been in space for 12 years. He had survived hull breaches, equipment failures, and even a brief firefight with pirates near the Outer Rim colonies. But he had never been alone. Not like this. He pulled himself back to the platform and magnetically locked his boots down. His hands were shaking. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think. The distress beacon was still active on the platform. That was good. But the Concordant Discovery had been on a deep space research mission, far from the usual shipping lanes. The chances of anyone picking up his signal were almost zero. Morrison looked out at the stars. They looked the same as they always did, cold and distant and uncaring. He thought about his sister back on Earth, about his niece who called him Uncle Jake and made him promise to bring her back a piece of a real asteroid. He thought about his crew, the people he had worked with for 2 years who had just left him here to die because saving him was not efficient. That was the thing about the galactic community. They were logical, practical. They made decisions based on mathematics and probability. 1 human life weighed against 43 alien lives was not a difficult equation for them. Humans were useful, sure. They could survive in harsh environments, work long hours, and adapt to situations that would kill most other species. But they were not valuable enough to risk a whole ship for. Morrison activated his suit's recording function. If someone did find his body eventually, at least his family would know what happened. "Hey, Sarah," he said, his voice cracking slightly. Sarah was his sister. "I guess I'm not making it home for your birthday this year." "I'm sorry about that. Tell Emily that Uncle Jake loves her very much and that I'm sorry I couldn't bring her that asteroid piece." He paused, wiping his eyes even though the tears just floated around inside his helmet. "I want you to know that I'm not scared." "Well, that's a lie. I'm terrified, but I'm going to keep working. I'm going to try to fix something, anything that might help. That's what we do, right? We don't quit. Even when the math says it's over, humans don't quit." Morrison looked at the damaged equipment around him. The platform had some basic life support systems, but they were fried from the radiation surge. Maybe, just maybe, if he could reroute some power, bypass the damaged circuits, he could extend his oxygen supply. It was a long shot. The kind of long shot that any sensible species would call impossible. But Morrison was human, and humans had never been particularly sensible. He pulled out his tools and got to work. The stars watched in silence as one man, abandoned and alone, refused to accept that his story was over. The signal took 18 hours to reach the nearest human listening post. It was an automated mining station on the edge of the Kepler sector, staffed by 6 people who spent most of their time bored out of their minds. When the distress beacon came through, the station manager almost ignored it, thinking it was another false alarm from some malfunctioning probe. But then he listened to the attached message. Commander Jake Morrison's voice, calm and steady despite everything, explaining what had happened. Explaining how he had been left behind. The manager's hand started shaking as he forwarded the signal to Earth Space Command with a priority alpha code. Within 2 hours, the message had reached Earth. Within 4 hours, it was everywhere. The response was immediate and volcanic. News networks played Morrison's recording on repeat. Social media exploded with rage. Politicians who had spent months arguing about budget allocations suddenly found themselves united on a single issue. The alien species who had left a human to die had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They did not understand humans. Not really. They saw humanity as individuals, each person making rational choices based on personal benefit. What they failed to grasp was that humans were a pack species, a tribal species. An attack on one was an attack on all. It did not matter if you were from Earth, Mars, the Belt Colonies, or some tiny settlement on the edge of known space. If you were human, you were family. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of Earth Space Command, watching the feeds come in from across human space. There were protests outside every alien embassy. Mining crews were walking off jobs on mixed-species stations. Human merchant ships were refusing to dock at non-human ports. The entire human economy was grinding to a halt, and it had only been 6 hours since Morrison's message went public. "Get me every available ship," Chen said to her staff. "I don't care if they're civilian, military, or private. If it can fly faster than light, I want it ready to move in 12 hours. Her second-in-command, Commander Park, stepped forward. "Admiral, the nearest vessel to Morrison's position is still 48 hours away at maximum speed. He only has 47 hours of oxygen according to his suit readings." "Then we find a way to go faster," Chen said flatly. "Ma'am, there is one option." Park pulled up a file on the main screen. "The Indomitable. It's been in testing for the past 3 months. New drive system, experimental design. The engineers say it could theoretically cut the travel time down to 52 hours, maybe less. That's still too long." "Yes, ma'am, but it's the best chance we have." Chen stared at the screen for a long moment. The Indomitable had never been tested at full capacity. The drive system was based on some radical new theories about space folding. It could work. It could also tear itself apart and kill everyone on board. How many crew would it need? "Minimum 12. Recommended? 30. Put out a call for volunteers. Tell them the truth about the risks. And get the Indomitable prepped for launch immediately." The call for volunteers went out at 1800 hours Earth Standard Time. By 1802, they had over 15,000 applications. Chen selected 12 crew members based on skill and experience, but she could have picked any 12 at random and they would have gone just as willingly. Every single volunteer knew the odds. They went anyway. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the alien species were watching the human response with growing confusion and alarm. The Velkari sent an official statement expressing regret for the unfortunate incident and offering standard compensation. The message was rejected before it even finished transmitting. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Representatives from 40 different species gathered to discuss what they were calling the human crisis. Ambassador Tikrell of the Valorians, a species known for their logical thinking, tried to explain the situation to his confused colleagues. "The humans are not behaving rationally," he said. "They are willing to risk multiple lives, waste enormous resources, and damage their own economy for one individual who, by all statistical analysis, cannot be saved. This makes no sense." A Hyvaran representative clicked its mandibles in agreement. "Our analysis shows that even if they reach this Morrison person, he will likely be dead." "Why are they trying?" A human ambassador, David Foster, stood up. He was an older man, gray-haired and tired-looking. He had been trying to build bridges between humanity and the galactic community for 20 years. Now those bridges were burning and he was done trying to put out the fires. "You want to know why?" Foster said quietly. "Because that's what we do. We don't leave our people behind, ever. You think it's about Morrison? It's not. It's about every human who has ever worked alongside your species, wondering if they'll be the next one you abandon when things get difficult." "But the mathematics," Tekrell began. "Damn the mathematics." Foster's voice rose. "You know what humans learned a long time ago? When you start calculating which lives are worth saving and which ones aren't, when you make it a numbers game, you lose something essential. You lose your humanity. And we're not willing to lose that, not for all the logic in the galaxy." The council chamber fell silent. Finally, the council chair spoke. "What do the humans want?" Foster looked around the room at all the alien faces, at species who had worked with humans for years but had never really understood them. "We want you to understand that if you work with us, fight beside us, live with us, then you don't get to decide one of us is expendable. We all come home or none of us do. That's not negotiable." Back on Earth, the Indomitable was being prepped for launch. Captain Sarah Okafor ran through the final checks with her skeleton crew. They were all volunteers. They all knew the ship might not survive the journey. They all knew Morrison was probably going to die before they reached him. They launched anyway, burning into space with their experimental drive screaming at maximum power, racing against time and physics itself to bring home one man who the rest of the galaxy had already written off as dead. The Indomitable shook violently as it pushed beyond every safety limit built into its systems. In the engine room, Chief Engineer David Liu watched the temperature gauges climb into the red zone and kept pushing them higher. Every alarm in the ship was screaming. He ignored them all. "How much more can we give her?" Captain Okafor's voice crackled over the intercom. Liu wiped sweat from his forehead. The engine room was like an oven, heat pouring off the experimental drives. "We're already at 130% capacity. The manufacturer said anything over 110 would cause permanent damage. I didn't ask what the manufacturer said. I asked how much more we can give." Liu looked at his assistant, a young woman named Torres who had volunteered knowing she might never see her family again. She nodded at him. They both knew what had to be done. "We can bypass the cooling system safeties," Liu said. "Route all power directly to the drives. We might get another 5%, maybe 8%. But Captain, if we do that, we won't be able to slow down properly. The ship will be crippled." There was a pause. Then Okafor's voice came back, steady and certain. "Do it. Getting there matters. Getting back is tomorrow's problem." Liu started pulling panels off the wall, his hands moving fast. Around him, the rest of the engineering crew did the same. They rerouted power, disabled safeties, and pushed the Indomitable beyond anything it was designed to do. The ship responded, its speed increasing as it tore through space faster than any human vessel had ever traveled. On the bridge, Okafor watched the numbers. They had been traveling for 20 hours. Morrison had maybe 27 hours of oxygen left, if he had not already used it up trying to stay warm in the freezing void. They were still 32 hours away at current speed. The math was brutal and unforgiving. "Captain, we're receiving telemetry from Morrison's suit," the communications officer said. "His vital signs they're not good." Okafor pulled up the data on her screen. Morrison's heart rate was erratic, jumping between too fast and too slow. His body temperature was dropping. The suit was trying its best to keep him alive, but it was fighting a losing battle against the cold of space. "Is he conscious?" "Unclear. The readings suggest he's been moving around, working on something, but his oxygen consumption is extremely low. He might be in some kind of reduced metabolic state." Okafor closed her eyes for a moment. Morrison was doing everything right, rationing his air, moving slowly to conserve energy, but it would not be enough. They all knew it would not be enough. 412 light-years away, Commander Jake Morrison was indeed still working. His hands were numb even inside his heated gloves. He had long since stopped being able to feel his feet. The cold was seeping through his suit despite its best efforts to maintain temperature. He knew what that meant. His core temperature was dropping. Eventually, his body would shut down to preserve his brain. Eventually, even that would not be enough, but he kept working anyway. He had managed to jury-rig the platform's damaged life support system, rerouting power from non-essential systems. It had bought him an extra 12 hours of oxygen. 12 hours he was going to use trying to stay alive, just one more minute, and then one more after that. Morrison's vision was getting blurry. He was not sure if it was from the cold, the lack of sleep, or the carbon dioxide that was slowly building up in his suit despite the recyclers working overtime. He had stopped recording messages hours ago. There was nothing left to say. Either someone was coming or they were not. Either he would live or he would die. Talking about it would not change anything. His hand slipped and a tool drifted away into space. Morrison watched it go, floating off into the darkness. He should probably retrieve it. He did not move. Moving took energy, and energy required oxygen, and oxygen was the most precious thing in the universe right now. The distress beacon was still pinging away, sending out its signal to the empty void. Morrison had not thought about it in hours. Hope was a luxury he could not afford. Hope required mental energy he needed to save for staying alive. Back on the Indomitable, Liu was performing what he privately thought of as miracles. He had pushed the drives to 142% capacity. The ship was shaking so hard that anything not bolted down had been stored away. The hull was making noises that no spaceship should ever make, but they were gaining time. Slowly, impossibly, they were gaining time. 28 hours out, Okafor announced. Morrison has approximately 24 hours of oxygen remaining. Still not enough, her first officer said, quietly. No, it's not. Okafor stood up from her chair and walked to the engineering station. She pulled up the drive schematics, studying them for several long minutes. Then she opened a ship-wide channel. All hands, this is the captain. I need everyone not currently on critical duty to report to their emergency stations and strap in. Engineering. I need you to tell me what happens if we do one more overburn. Not a long one, just 60 seconds at maximum possible thrust. Liu's voice came back immediately. Captain, the drives will burn out. We'll lose faster than light capability entirely. We'll be stranded wherever we end up. Will it get us there in time? There was a long pause. Okafor could hear Liu running calculations, could imagine him staring at the numbers, trying to find any other way. Yes, Liu finally said. If we do it at the right moment, if everything holds together, if we don't tear the ship apart in the process, yes, we might get there with 90 minutes to spare. How many ifs was that, Chief? Too many, Captain. Way too many. Okafor looked around the bridge at her crew. They were all volunteers. They had all known this might be a one-way trip. She could see in their faces that they were ready to take that chance. Prepare for final overburn, she said. We're bringing our boy home. The Indomitable flew on through the darkness, every system pushed beyond its limits, every crew member watching the clock count down. Somewhere ahead in the black void of space, Morrison's oxygen counter ticked lower. 23 hours. 22 hours, 21. The race against time continued, and nobody knew who would win. The Indomitable's final overburn lasted exactly 61 seconds. For those 61 seconds, the experimental drives screamed at power levels that should have been physically impossible. The ship shook so violently that even strapped into their seats, the crew was thrown around like toys. Metal groaned. Circuits sparked and failed. And then, with a sound like reality tearing apart, the drives burned out completely. Captain Okafor dragged herself back to consciousness. Her head was ringing and something warm was running down her face. Blood, probably. She wiped it away and checked her console. They had dropped out of faster-than-light travel. More accurately, they had crashed out of it when the drives died. But according to sensors, Morrison's beacon was close. Very close. Status report, she called out, her voice hoarse. Responses came in from around the ship. 2 broken arms, multiple concussions, 1 fractured rib. The drives were completely dead, along with half the ship's secondary systems. They were alive, barely, and they were here. I have him on visual, the navigator said. 300 meters ahead. Okafor pulled up the external cameras. There was Morrison's platform, a small piece of metal floating in the void. And there was Morrison himself, still magnetically locked to the surface. He was not moving. Get me his vital signs, Captain. I'm not reading any vital signs. No heartbeat. No respiration. His suit computer shows 0 oxygen remaining as of 4 minutes ago. 4 minutes. They had missed him by 4 minutes. Okafor felt something break inside her chest, but she pushed it down. Get a team suited up. Bring him in. Dr. Yuki, prep medical bay for emergency revival. The medical officer's voice came back hesitant. Captain, if he's been without oxygen for more than 3 or 4 minutes, the brain damage. I said prep for revival, Doctor. We didn't come all this way to give up now. The recovery team moved fast. They got Morrison disconnected from the platform and brought him into the airlock. His suit was covered in frost. His face, visible through the helmet, was blue-gray and still. They rushed him to medical bay where Dr. Yuki and her team were waiting. Core temperature is 28 degrees, Yuki said, scanning Morrison with her instruments. He's in severe hypothermia. That might have actually helped preserve brain function. Get him on the warming table, carefully. Too fast and we'll kill him. They worked for 30 minutes. Yuki shocked Morrison's heart 3 times, pushing doses of drugs that would have been dangerous for someone in normal condition, and were definitely dangerous for someone who had been frozen in space. The monitors stayed flat. No heartbeat. No brain activity. Captain, I don't think, Yuki started. Keep trying. Ma'am, it's been over 30 minutes without oxygen. Even if we revive him, I said keep trying. Yuki looked at her captain's face and saw something there that made her nod. She prepared another injection, a drug that was technically experimental and definitely not approved for use in these conditions. She pushed it into Morrison's IV line and shocked his heart one more time. The monitor beeped. Once. Twice. A rhythm started, weak and irregular. But there. Morrison's heart was beating. I've got a pulse, Yuki shouted. It's weak, but it's there. Come on, Commander. Breathe for me. Morrison's chest hitched once, then again. His lungs started working, drawing in oxygen from the respirator. The monitor showed brain activity, faint but present. Yuki looked up at Okafor with tears in her eyes. He's alive. I don't know how, but he's alive. The news spread through the Indomitable like wildfire. The crew who had pushed themselves beyond exhaustion, who had crippled their own ship, who had risked everything for one man they had never met, started crying and hugging each other. They had done it. Against every odd, against every calculation that said it was impossible, they had done it. But the Indomitable was stranded. With no faster-than-light capability, they were stuck in the middle of nowhere with a crippled ship and a critically injured man. They sent out a distress call of their own and prepared to wait. They did not have to wait long. Within 12 hours, 4 more human ships arrived. Within 24 hours, there were 20 ships. Within 48 hours, the entire fleet had gathered, bringing supplies, medical equipment, and engineers to help repair the Indomitable. Nobody had ordered them to come. They came because that was what humans did. Morrison remained unconscious for 3 days, his body slowly warming, his brain slowly healing. When he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Captain Okafor sitting beside his medical bed. "Welcome back, Commander," she said softly. Morrison tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Okafor held a cup of water to his lips, and he took a small sip. "How long?" he managed to croak out. "You've been out for 3 days. You were clinically dead for 32 minutes. Dr. Yuki says you should have brain damage, but so far you're looking good. You're one lucky man." Morrison closed his eyes. "Not luck. You came for me. Of course we came. We're human. That's what we do." Back on Earth, the news of Morrison's rescue had hit even harder than the news of his abandonment. The footage of the Indomitable's crew pulling his frozen body from space, of Dr. Yuki shocking his heart back to life, of him opening his eyes 3 days later, became the most watched video in human history. But something had broken in the relationship between humanity and the galactic community. The aliens did not understand the rage they had unleashed. They tried to make amends, offering compensation, apologizing for the misunderstanding. But humans were not interested in apologies. Trade agreements were canceled. Diplomatic relationships went cold. Human workers walked off jobs across the galaxy. The careful cooperation that had been built over 15 years crumbled in a matter of weeks. The Galactic Council called another emergency session, this time with real concern in their voices. The human economy was relatively small compared to the galactic whole, but humans filled roles that nobody else wanted. They worked in dangerous environments, took risks other species considered insane, and pushed boundaries that more cautious species would not approach. Without humans, mining operations slowed to a crawl. Exploration efforts stopped. Dangerous rescue and salvage operations had no one willing to do them. The galaxy, it turned out, had become dependent on human recklessness without realizing it. Ambassador Foster stood before the council once more. He looked older than he had a month ago, tired and worn down, but his voice was firm. "You want to know what it will take to fix this?" he said. "It's simple. We need a new agreement. A promise that no member of any species will be abandoned when rescue is possible. We need it in writing, signed by every species that wants to work with us, and we need to know that you understand why this matters." The council members looked at each other. Some were confused. Some were resentful. But all of them were starting to understand that they had miscalculated badly when they left Commander Jake Morrison to die in space. 6 months after his rescue, Commander Jake Morrison stood on a stage at the Unity Conference, a gathering of representatives from every major species in the known galaxy. He had not wanted to be here. He was an engineer, not a diplomat, not a symbol. But somehow he had become both. His recovery had been slow and painful. The doctors said it was a miracle he had survived with so little permanent damage. A few memory gaps, some nerve damage in his fingers that was slowly healing, and nightmares that woke him up gasping for air. Small prices to pay for being dead for 32 minutes. The conference hall was massive, built to accommodate species of all sizes and shapes. Morrison looked out at the assembled representatives. Some were humanoid, some were insectoid. Some were things that human language had no good words to describe. They were all watching him, waiting to hear what he had to say. Morrison cleared his throat. "I've been asked to talk about what happened to me out there in space. To be honest, I don't remember a lot of it. I remember the ship leaving. I remember trying to fix the life support systems. After that, it gets fuzzy. I remember being cold, so cold that I thought I'd never be warm again. And then I remember waking up on the Indomitable with Captain Okafor looking down at me." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "But here's what I've learned since then. The Concordant Discovery crew made a choice that day. They looked at the situation, did the math, and decided that one life was not worth 43 lives. By the logic of mathematics, they were right. I understand that. I really do." There was some stirring in the audience. Morrison held up a hand. "But humans don't do math on lives. We can't. Because the moment you start calculating who's worth saving and who's not, the moment you decide that some people are acceptable losses, you've crossed a line that we can't cross. You've said that people are resources, not individuals, that some of us matter less than others." Morrison looked directly at the section where the Velkari delegation sat. Captain Thesic was there, mandibles clicking nervously. "You didn't leave Commander Morrison out there in space. You left a person. A human being with a family, with people who loved him, with a life that mattered. And when humans found out, they didn't ask if saving me made economic sense. They didn't calculate the risk versus reward. They just came." He smiled slightly. 12 people volunteered to fly an experimental ship that might explode at any moment. They pushed that ship beyond every safety limit. They crippled it, stranded themselves, and risked their own lives. For one person they had never met. Because that's what humans do. We don't leave people behind. A representative from the Hyverin Collective stood up, its translator device crackling. "But Commander Morrison, this is not logical. Resources are limited. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good." Morrison nodded. "You're right. Resources are limited, and sometimes hard choices have to be made. But here's the thing about humans. We learned a long time ago what happens when you start deciding which lives are worth less. We've seen where that road leads. It leads to darkness, to horrors that we swore we'd never repeat. So we drew a line. All lives matter. Not some lives. All of them." Another representative spoke up. This one from a species Morrison did not recognize. "But surely there must be practical limits. What if saving one person requires the sacrifice of many? Then we find another way," Morrison said simply. "We're humans. We're stubborn, creative, and too dumb to know when something is impossible. We put people on the moon with computers less powerful than modern calculators. We survived plagues, wars, and disasters that should have wiped us out. We don't give up, and we don't leave people behind. Ever." Over the next 3 months, the Morrison protocols were drafted and debated. The basic principle was simple. If rescue was theoretically possible, it had to be attempted regardless of risk or cost. No crew member of any species could be abandoned when there was any chance of survival. Some species signed immediately. Others took longer, debating the implications, calculating the costs. A few refused outright, considering the whole thing emotional nonsense. Humanity's response to those species was polite but firm. They would no longer work with, trade with, or cooperate with any species that would not sign. It created a divide in the galactic community. Species that signed the protocols found themselves with access to human technology, human workers, and human cooperation. Species that refused found themselves isolated, struggling to fill roles that humans had previously filled. The economic pressure was intense. Within 4 months, 40 more species had signed. Within 6 months, only a handful of holdouts remained, and they were starting to reconsider. One evening, Morrison was walking through the human sector of Unity Station, the neutral space station where the conference had been held. He was still getting used to being recognized everywhere he went. People wanted to shake his hand, take pictures with him, thank him for something he did not fully understand. He had just been trying to survive. The heroes were the crew of the Indomitable. He was thinking about this when someone called his name. Morrison turned to see Captain Thesic approaching. The Velkari captain moved hesitantly, mandibles clicking, and what Morrison had learned was a sign of nervousness. "Commander Morrison," Thesic said through his translator, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Morrison studied the alien who had left him to die. He had thought about this moment many times, imagined what he would say. Now that it was here, he found he was not angry, just tired. "Captain," Morrison said neutrally, "I wanted to speak with you, to apologize. I made a choice that day based on logic and mathematics. I thought it was the correct choice. I did not understand. I still do not fully understand why what I did was wrong. But I'm trying to learn." Morrison nodded slowly. "You want to know what bothers me most about that day, Captain? It's not that you left me. You did what your training, your culture, your entire way of thinking told you was right. What bothers me is that it was so easy for you. You did the math and made the call, and that was it. You didn't lose sleep over it. You didn't wonder if there was another way." Thesic's mandibles clicked rapidly. "That is true. I did not. Should I have?" "Yeah," Morrison said quietly. "You should have. Because here's what humans learned the hard way, over thousands of years of making terrible mistakes. The moment it becomes easy to sacrifice someone, the moment you can do it without it tearing you apart inside, that's when you've lost something essential. That's when you stop being a civilization and start being just a collection of individuals looking out for themselves." "I do not understand," Thesic admitted. "The mathematics have not changed. One life versus many is still the same equation." Morrison shook his head. "It's not about the math, Captain. It's about what kind of people we want to be. Do we want to be the kind who leave people behind when it's convenient? Or do we want to be the kind who move heaven and earth to save one person, even when it doesn't make sense? Humans chose a long time ago. We're the second kind. And that choice, that refusal to abandon people, is what makes us human." He started to walk away, then turned back. "You know what's funny, Captain? Your species is older than mine, more advanced in a lot of ways. But there's one thing humans have figured out that you haven't. The species that leaves people behind eventually leaves everyone behind. We learned that lesson in Blood and Fire. Maybe you won't have to." 3 days later, the Velkari announced they were signing the Morrison protocols. It was not an easy decision for them. Their entire culture was built on logical thinking and practical choices. But they were learning slowly that there were some things more important than logic. The Indomitable, after 6 months of repairs and upgrades, was ready to launch again. The crew had been offered medals, promotions, and cushy positions anywhere they wanted. Most of them had declined. They were explorers, adventurers, the kind of people who pushed boundaries because they had to, not for glory or reward. Morrison stood in the hangar bay, watching as engineers did final checks on the ship that had saved his life. On the hull, in letters 2 meters tall, was a new inscription: "No one gets left behind." Captain Okafor joined him, looking up at her ship. "It's a good motto," she said. "It's more than a motto," Morrison replied. "It's a promise. And a warning." "A warning?" Morrison smiled slightly. "Yeah, a warning to the universe that humans are here and we do things differently. We don't calculate which lives are worth saving. We don't make easy choices. We do the hard thing, the expensive thing, the risky thing, because that's what it means to be human." The Indomitable launched the next day, heading out on another mission to the edges of known space. The crew was ready for anything, knowing that if things went wrong, other humans would come for them. No matter the cost, no matter the odds, because humans had made a promise not just to each other but to the galaxy. No one gets left behind, and humanity never forgot its own.